All right, I'm going to be going over comparing bits and pieces review for quiz investigation 2 and 3. Number 1 says compare the fractions in each pair, insert greater than, less than, or equal to signs, and explain your reasoning. A, we have -2/4 versus -5/8. All right, so the easiest way, in my opinion, to look at this is to get common denominators. 4 and 8 can both go into 8. So I'm just going to rename my fractions with an 8 on the bottom. And to get to 8, I do 4 times 2 to get 8, so 2 times 2 is 4. So remember, this is opposite world, so first just say which one is bigger. 5/8 is bigger than 4/8. But in opposite world, 4/8 is bigger. Another way people who are comfortable with fractions could look at this and say, well, this is exactly half, and this is just over half, because half of 8 would be 4. So this is actually just over half and equal to half. So in normal world, this is bigger, but in opposite world, this one's bigger. B, 6/10 versus 20/2. This one's pretty obvious from the get-go. This one is not even equal to a whole. To be a whole, it would have to be 10/10. So this is less than 1. 20/2, well, that's way more than 1. We would just, 2 2s would make a whole. So this is a lot more than a whole, so we already know that it's bigger. You could do the same thing we did over here. Rename them both with 10s on the bottom, and then you would find out that 20/2 is much more. C, 25/15 versus 7/12. Again, this one is very similar to this one. Here we have a fraction that doesn't even equal 1. 12/12 is 1, so this is much less than 1. 15/15 would be equal to 1. This is much more than that. So we already know. If you didn't know how to do that, you could rename these with a common denominator. If you don't know a common denominator, you can always do 15 times 12, which is 180, and rename them both with 180, and then you would find out that this one was bigger. D, 3/8 versus 3/12. Okay? So we could rename this one pretty easily with 24 on the bottom. 12 times 2 is 24, so 3 times 2 is 6. 8 times 3 is 12, so 3 times 3 is 9. Well, 9/12 is more than 6/12. You also, some of you who are comfortable with fractions could look at this and say, well, this gummy worm, or whatever it is, has only been cut into 8 pieces, so each piece is a little bigger than this one would be. And so 3 of these pieces would be more, versus if you split the same gummy worm into 12 pieces, the pieces would be smaller. So 3 smaller pieces of this would be smaller. But again, you could always just rename it. 2, find 3 numbers between 61/100ths and 62/100ths. So the easiest way, in my opinion, to do this is just to add a 0 and know that you're looking for numbers between 610 and 620, or 610 thousandths and 620 thousandths. Well, that would be everything that falls between there. 0.611, 0.612, keep going, 613, 614, 615, all the way up to 0.619. Any of those numbers would do. There's actually thousands of numbers that would be correct. Those are just the simplest to get to. Number 3 says that this is 1/8 of a chewy fruit worm. Draw the rest of the worm. So it's saying that this is 1/8 of the worm. This is the second 1/8, third, fourth, fifth, 6, 7, 8. There's the rest of your worm. Number 4, arrange from least to greatest. I always line my decimals going up and down so that I don't make as many errors. And I also always put my negative numbers together and my positive numbers together. Okay, so if I'm going from least to greatest, I already know that these numbers are going to be smaller than these numbers. So I'm going to work over here in opposite world first. In opposite world, 5 is not the biggest number, it's the smallest number. So I will start with that. And then we got to look here, well, we got 43 versus 50. 50 is normally bigger, but in opposite world, it's smaller. And then we have our last one, Now we got to come over here and decide what is smaller and then bigger. We're back in normal world now. So is 50 bigger or 62? Well, 50 is bigger and smaller. And then our largest number is the 62 thousandths. Number 5, give me paper here. Number 5 says the ratio of boys to girls in the class is 3 to 1. This is boys, this is girls. It's important to label these because you can make silly errors if you don't. So it says that if there's 15 boys, then how many girls? That's our question. Well, we can just simply say, well, how do we get from 3 to 15? Well, we're multiplying by 5. So we're going to do the same thing over here. 1 times 5 is 5. So your answer should be that there are 5 girls. 6. List all the possible numbers that have an absolute value of 4. Remember, absolute value just means how far is it from 0. So there's only 2 ways you can go from 0. You can go positive and you can go negative. Both of these have an absolute value of 4. All right, number 7. If I ordered 300 boxes of Kleenex for the math teachers, total of 8 teachers, how many boxes will each teacher get? Write your answer as a fraction and a decimal. So I have 300 boxes and I need to give them to 8 teachers. 8 does not go into 3. 8 goes into 33 times. 8 into 60 goes 7 times. And then I'm going to take my remainder and put it over my divisor. It's going to give me 37 and 4/8. We don't leave 4/8 because it's not reduced. We can reduce that by 4. So we end up with 37 and 1/2 because 4 divided by 4 is 1, 8 divided by 4 is 2. It also wants it as a decimal. You should have memorized by now that 37 and 1/2 is the same thing as 37 and 5/10 or 37.5. 8. I'm making brownies. The entire pan makes 20 brownies. 20 brownies. The recipe calls for the following: 6 cups of flour, 4 eggs, 2 cups cocoa, 4 teaspoons oil. A. How much cocoa is used per cup of flour? So it wants to know cocoa per cup of flour. This is just a unit rate, guys. It just looks a little scarier, but all it wants is a unit rate. It wants that second number to be a 1. So first thing I do is write what I do know about cocoa and flour. Cocoa, I know that I'm going to use 2 cups and 6 cups of flour. Okay. We want it to become 1 cup of flour. So how do I get 6 to become a 1? Well, I divide by 6. 6 divided by 6 is 1 cup. 2 divided by 6 is 2/6, which then can be reduced by 2, which gives you 1/3 of a cup. So your answer should be 1/3 of a cup per 1 cup of flour, or 1/3 a cup of cocoa. Let's be correct here. B. How many eggs are used per teaspoon of oil? So again, we want eggs per teaspoon of oil. Again, the second number is just 1. It's asking for a unit rate. So first write down what you know. I know that I have 4 eggs per 4 teaspoons oil. And I want this to become 1 teaspoon. So 4 divided by 4 is 1. And 4 divided by 4 is 1. So simply 1 egg per 1 teaspoon of oil. Last one is C. I decide to share the brownies with my 2 sisters evenly. So it says just shares. It doesn't say he gives it to them. So there's going to be 3 people. How many brownies does each person get? Justify your answer. We already know that there's 20 brownies and 3 people. So we're going to divide 20 divided by 3. And to give this into a fraction, we take our remainder and put it over a divisor. And that gives us 6 2/3 brownies. So to justify your answer, you'll need to write something like, with 20 brownies and 3 people, if you divide the 20 brownies up 3 ways equally, each person will get 6 full pieces of brownie and then 2/3 of a piece of brownie. Something along those lines. Hope this was helpful. See me before the quiz if you need help.